G'day viewers, how are you? It's Wednesday, hump day, made it halfway through the week. Not always an easy thing to do. Now normally on Wednesday, I try and shoehorn a story into the format Wangafat Wednesday. Who am I not giving a fuck about today? But this one I wanted to talk about, I really just couldn't arbitrarily put it in that category. So it's the generic angry news because this is a reasonably big story in Australia this week. It revolves around the misadventures of the government's energy minister, one Angus Taylor. And he has a few misadventures. There's some really incredibly questionable stuff he's been involved in. But the thing he's facing now is arguably the least important of the scandals he's been tied up in, but the most likely to damage him. Not that you'd be able to tell from the reactions of the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's refusing to take any action at all. Let me run you through it. And this is slightly complicated, so I will really simplify this. Starts off, the Sydney City Council pass a motion to say Australia's facing a climate emergency, and they tell the government, the federal government, we've got to do something. This is an emergency. Now, the council is led by Mayor Clover Moore. She's fairly radical lefty by a lot of people's standards, and so they've made this symbolic statement. It's a climate emergency. Government, do something. Now, this government doesn't like admitting climate change is real, let alone we're facing an emergency, let alone their policies are actively making everything worse, and scientists around the world say, no, you've got to stop this. They like to be in what's called massive denial about that. But they decided they couldn't simply ignore this statement from the City Council. They decided to slag them. And Angus Taylor writes a letter back to Clover Moore saying, pull your head in. If you're so concerned, you shouldn't spend so much on travel because that has a big carbon footprint. And look at how much you spend. He's tallying up they've spent $15 million on travel, which I assume was a bit of a surprise to the Lord Mayor because when they looked up the figures, the actual figures from the council report were closer to 6,000. So yeah, there you go. Government minister says you spent over $15 million on travel, big carbon footprint, and the actual figure was closer to I don't just mean closer to 6,000. It was about $6,000. So that's a little bit egregious. And Clover Moore says, hey buddy, you withdraw that. And because it was also run in the paper, she's basically saying, paper, you've got to retract that. I'm going to send a complaint to the Press Council about this blatantly false story. And so, does Angus Taylor fess up and go, I was wrong? He goes, no, I got that off your website. You must have changed what's on the website. Not my fault. Now, this is one of the many times where Angus Taylor has shown himself to be not hugely bright, because you can, using various tools, basically forensically track the history of content on a website. Clover Moore comes back and says, here's the evidence. That figure has always been there on the website. The $6,000 figure has always been there. There's never been $15 million worth of travel on it. Never been there. Does Angus Taylor at this point fess up? No, he does not. He continues to say it's not his fault. At a certain point, he goes, oh, I'm really sorry, I relied on wrong fingers. But he continues to refuse to accept responsibility. So, if we take it that the council has got their records to show the figures that Angus Taylor said was on their website were never on their website, what is inescapable is either Angus Taylor was consciously lying, or whoever provided the information to Angus Taylor was consciously lying but never told the minister they were consciously lying. I'll let you ruminate on how likely you think that latter option is, but those are the only two possibilities. Angus Taylor himself was consciously lying all along, or the information was provided to him by someone who consciously lied but didn't tell him. And it's, as I point out, it's not even a small lie. It's a ridiculously huge lie, saying the figure was $15 million when it was $6,000. It's absolutely farcical. And Labor smell blood in the water, the opposition, and they've referred it to the police. They're going, well, has an offence been committed here? And is the minister covering it up? Is that another offence? Did the minister say things that they knew to be untrue in the defence of an offence being committed? And that put the wind up the government, but they still did nothing. Prime Minister Morrison is still saying, oh, stand behind him. And really, the topper that came this week was when the New South Wales Police confirmed they were actually running a formal investigation. They formed a task force, which the police like to do. And they're investigating if they can find the source of the falsehood. And the topper was Scott Morrison calling the police commissioner to say, oh, what's all this about then? Now, here's the thing. If you are any sort of responsible government, the appearance of impropriety is to be avoided. If there's a possibility something's wrong, you go, hands off, let's investigate this objectively. And just for reference, a couple of famous cases from the past, which by modern standards are absolutely laughable, but were treated very seriously at the time. Back in the 70s, the Fraser Liberal government, he had a minister bring a TV into Australia. And this was back in the days of black and white TVs, and colour TVs were more expensive. And they, in fact, had a higher tax excise on it. And what this government minister worked out when he was overseas for work, I assume, he could buy a TV overseas for much, much, much cheaper than it was to buy one in Australia because of taxes and excises. And when he brought it in, he had to declare it. If he declared it as a black and white TV, that was much cheaper than declaring it as a colour TV. And so he did that. He declared that his colour TV was a black and white TV. Now, he lost his ministerial position because of this. And not only that, the minister in charge of the department who investigated, he lost his job because of the perception that the investigation was so badly handled. So that's two ministers losing their job for saying that a colour TV was actually a black and white TV. Then a few years later, the Hawke Labor government, one of his ministers brought back a Paddington bear, like a stuffed toy Paddington bear from a holiday to the UK or maybe a government trip to the UK, and didn't declare it. And it had monetary value. And it's like, someone goes, oh, this thing, you bought this in England and you didn't declare it because you may owe a duty on this. Oh no. And so, again, to avoid the appearance of impropriety, this minister stepped aside from his role while the investigation was going on into a fucking Paddington bear. So, and this was regarded as a big deal. This was regarded as, that made that minister incompetent and untrustworthy. The Paddington bear affair. Now, this guy has been part of a plot where somebody egregiously lied about the details of this report. And again, when he said this was true in Parliament, there's a little thing called misleading Parliament. That's actually taken quite seriously. If you are found to have misled the Parliament, that is not good for your political career. You would not expect to hold on to a ministerial position. Scummo keeps insisting Taylor has done nothing wrong. He's not even doing the symbolic thing of, he shall step aside while there's an investigation. A fucking police investigation, by the way. He's going, no, I stand behind him 100%. And what do you mean, me calling the cops is threatening? It was just a jovial chat. Again, it's the appearance of impropriety. You don't have to be a huge conspiracy theorist to go, oh, when the PM has been ardently defending one of his ministers and then it's confirmed the cops are investigating, the PM calls the top cop, and no matter how jovial the conversation is, there's no undercurrent of let's make this come out the way I want it to come out. It's the appearance of absolute interference in a police investigation. And where this falls, who knows? Albanese, the opposition leader, thinks he's on to something now. He's also trying to get the Prime Minister in trouble, have him censured by the Parliament. Maybe something will happen. Likely nothing will happen. Who knows? But I want to leave you this one thing. As I said, the police formed a task force and they gave it a name, Garad. And they tend to give names to task forces that don't necessarily mean a lot. Don't know why they choose this one, but they maybe should have looked it up on Urban Dictionary before they did. And in case you happen to not be familiar with Urban Dictionary, it's a webpage where you can put your own definition of slang terms up or completely invent terms and give them a definition, and multiple people can give competing definitions, and you vote for which is the best definition. Garad has been on Urban Dictionary for over a decade. There's a few definitions there, and like I said, that goes back more than a decade. All of the definitions are insults, pretty severe ones, and as of today, checking Urban Dictionary, the most popular definition for Garad is the dumbest motherfucker in the land.